acknowledge the fact that the sentence talks about all men are created equal. You haven't talked about the fact that the sentence was written by Thomas Jefferson, who owned slaves. So how can we take something from the beginning of our country and in any way claim it as something that should be shared by all of us as representing the meaning of America? So there's a way of putting this first question. It's one substitute of Martin Luther King as having raised it. He described the Declaration of Independence as a promissory note. And we sort of have a big roiling debate at the moment about whether it was indeed a promissory note with flaws that now need to be made good on, or is it an example of false consciousness, just lies that can never be recuperated? I want to come back to this sentence a little bit to help you think about where it went right and where it went wrong. And my goal in doing that is partly about trying to resolve this debate between is this a promissory note or an example of false consciousness. So it's first of all the case that this is just a teeny, tiny technical detail, but they did use, and we're using the word men here to mean human beings. And the reason we know that is because in Jefferson's first full draft, he also had a condemnation of the slave trade, where he described the problem of men, which he would call caps, being bought and sold at auction. And when he said that men were bought and sold, he didn't mean that only males were bought and sold. Everybody knew that men, women, and children were bought and sold. And he's using the word men here in the same universalizing way to mean human beings. That doesn't mean that there were no issues about gender at the founding. Okay? The fact that Jefferson also managed to write a passage condemning slavery doesn't mean there were no issues about slavery at the founding. Obviously, there were. It was a fundamental sin and crime at the founding. But how did they think about that? I think we have to be more precise about understanding how the founding thought about this problem if we are actually to understand how we can make use of our own early ideas. So for me, there are two particularly interesting letters that were written to John Adams. John Adams was from Boston, Massachusetts, was against slavery, never owned slaves, thought slaves were bad. He was actually the prime mover of the politics leading up to the Declaration of Independence. So Thomas Jefferson was working for John Adams. Okay? There was a committee that worked on the Declaration. Jefferson happened to be chair. The reason he was chair was because he was young and he wasn't very busy. He didn't have very many committee assignments. It's true. And he wrote pretty well. That mattered too. But John Adams and Richard Henry of Virginia were the busy ones. They were driving the politics. They were pushing independence. John Adams was driving the language of happiness that was used in the Declaration, which displaced property, which people defending slavery were trying to use. Okay? And John Adams got Jefferson elected to chair the committee to draft this document. So John Adams was very, very in the middle of thinking about these concepts and how they're organized. And there were two letters that were written to him that directly address the ideas laid out here. One from his wife, Abigail Adams. You may have heard of this letter. It's the very famous Remember the Ladies letter. He says, you guys are pursuing revolution and freedom and liberty for men. That's great. You know, it sounds pretty exciting. What about the ladies? And John writes back and says, well, you know, it's the job of the men to ensure that the principles of life, liberty, and happiness, in effect, are provided to everybody. Okay? And Abigail writes back and says, come on. Look at history. Men have not had a good track record for exercising power in relationship to women. So, okay, fine. We'll give you one more try, but recognize that if you don't succeed at what you've promised, protecting our rights too, there will be a revolution of the ladies. And she was right. There was a revolution of the ladies. It took too long, but it ended up in the amendment that brought women's right to vote. But what's important in that story I just told is the structure of Adams's answer. Because it explains how even people who were against slavery managed to reconcile themselves to slavery. And it shows you what the deepest mistake was in the philosophical structure of the founding. Okay? So in Adams' answer, and he gave the same kind of answer to somebody else who wrote and said, shouldn't men without property and Negroes be able to vote? And he gave the same answer. The rights apply to everybody. It's the job of men with property to protect them from everybody else. Now, what that answer is doing is taking this two-part structure of work down here, the foundation of principles and the powers of government, and saying the principles, the notion that every human being has rights, and government should secure those rights, those do apply to everybody. to all human beings. We meant that as all human beings. But this organizing the powers of government thing, that's for the men with property. In other words, what he's saying is it takes a patriarchal form of social and political structures to secure rights for everybody and well-being and flourishing for everybody. That's wrong. It's just philosophically wrong, and a lot of us have been working hard for about 150 years to show how and why that's the case. And the fact that it's philosophically wrong shows up in the realities of the world. When you give one set of people power over others, there are no checks and limits, and it is ultimately abused, inevitably. So it is empirically wrong alongside being philosophically wrong. So in other words, they made a mistake, and there are a whole lots of reasons to explain their mistake, ranging from self-interest to fear to racism. It's a whole bundle of things that explain those mistakes. But the good news is we have actually fixed those mistakes, right? Because we are now able to talk about how you build democracy on the basis of the notion that if you want to secure the rights of all people, as the foundation principle points to, you have to organize the powers in such a way that include everybody who is affected by that power. So the principle of inclusion has become the modern correction to the founding. Not dispensing with the ideas of the founding, building on them, extending them, and correcting an actual philosophical error in the original moment. Okay? So, now, but why have I gone through all of that? I've gone through it because I wanted to show you that there is a way of thinking about our own founding that permits us to appreciate our history and be honest about its errors and crimes. So to appreciate without deifying, and be honest about the crimes without slipping into cynicism. The fact of the error doesn't mean we have to abandon the incredibly powerful idea that it is the right of the people to make judgments about their government and redesign it. Okay? It is not worth throwing that idea away because they made the mistake of thinking that patriarchal forms of how power is organized were acceptable. Following me? Okay. So this then is where we started, and now I've shown you how we have done some philosophical corrections. And even though it's possible to think about our founding in this way, and to begin from there to think about what the work is we do together as citizens, and perhaps build out to a conception of the meaning of America, most of us, most of the time, have very few ways to begin to do that work of finding anything shared with Americans with whom we disagree, or where our life experiences are very different from other Americans.